Good evening, Stuart.
How are you, my friend?
Very good. No longer the morning. Trying a little different
It's
cycle
morning.
here.
It's morning here.
Yeah. I'm Scott Nichols. I'm with my friend Stuart Litwiller. We're going to attempt to answer a question this evening, or the morning over in
Yes,
Kenya.
sir. Yeah, it's morning here. Which we gotta, like I say, your background looks a little different today, Scott.
It's got a little shine on it now, doesn't it?
Well, it looks kind of nice. I like it. I like wood. I love wood.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you. You
Yeah.
received the question. Why don't you lead off, Stuart?
Scott, I received a question that somebody's very fascinated with our topics, and they said, "What's the difference between the law that's written on our hearts and our conscience?" And together with that question is, how do you free your conscience from wrong beliefs? I think I'd say it that way. So, do you got some ideas on that?
I'm thinking of Noam Chomsky. He's a professor of linguistics, internationally known scholar. And he made the comment when I was researching here several years back, researching positive law and moral law and common law. Got a little kitty down here I'm going to play with. But anyway, Noam Chomsky made the comment. He said even a very young child, if I remember right, almost an infant or slightly beyond an infant, understands the concept of fairness.
Yes.
That's interesting. That means that it's hardwired. Here's the
Uh-huh.
key. Here's the kitty that's causing me some trouble.
Meow.
Yeah, he's bad news.
Okay.
But yeah, even an infant has a sense, or slightly beyond the infant, a young child has a sense of fairness. Where does that come
Uh-huh.
from? That's what I call the moral law, isn't it? Where Paul in Romans
Probably.
2, Paul says that even the Gentiles who don't have the written law have something written on their heart that informs them of right and wrong.
Yeah.
So that's the moral law. And I think we all have it, maybe some in more degree than others. But then the question is how does the conscience compare to that? How do you differentiate between the moral law written on the heart and the conscience? Well, I think that's really simple. The conscience is trained. It's educated.
Yeah. Some of it's caught and some of it's taught.
Yeah, exactly.
You talk about our zip code law. Some of it you just know from observing, and some of it your mama says, "Don't you do that."
Yeah, you pick it up by osmosis, by direct training, and you
Yeah.
just pick it up from the vibe of the disapproving looks of people around you when you do something that's not cool in that zip code. Yeah,
Yeah.
so the zip code law, in my view, is everything that you've been raised to believe. It includes the conditioning of your country, of your county, of your town, of your local province, the religion you're born into, your family. All of that stuff becomes your zip code law, and
Right.
that becomes your conscience. It's not reliable.
But it's not all bad.
No, not all bad.
No, it helps guide our behavior and make us more sociably acceptable.
Yeah, because like earlier this morning we were talking about this question, and we talked about the fact that there's a certain group of religious people that they would really feel condemned in their heart if they drove a car.
Some would feel condemned. Sorry, I cut you off. There's a little lag
Yeah.
from 8,000 miles apart, and it's I'm watching your lip, but I'm watching your lips, but it still causes some problems sometimes.
Yeah, there's about a half second lag, and I need to employ the anticipator circuit, I guess, to try to get this thing synced up.
It's okay. At least people will understand now why it's happening.
Yeah.
Some would feel condemned if they ate certain foods.
Some feel condemned if they play a musical instrument. Some
Yeah,
would feel condemned if they went dancing, for example. Listen to rock and roll. There's 10,000 things that the conscience can be habituated to. And I think my answer to that question is that we need to examine the conscience. We actually need to take the conscience, which is a trained thing, and put it up against the moral law or the laws of principles of natural justice, and critique it and see what
right.
stands and what falls. But having said that, you really can't sin against your own conscience. Now, this is my view. This is something that I really can't prove, but this is my personal view, so I'll just put it out there and for people's consideration. If you honestly believe that you cannot drive a car without being immoral, then you probably can't. It's hard to do that without defiling your own conscience.
Mhm.
So the only way that the man who believes he can't drive a car, we're talking extreme religious thing, almost cultish type things here. The person who believes he can't drive a car, he can't just muscle that thing to the ground, wrestle it to the ground, and say, you know what, I'm going to drive a car and I don't care. That's not going to work. He'll defile himself. But he has to start the laborious and arduous process of re-educating his conscience to where he can freely drive a car without defiling his own conscience. Does that make sense, or do you disagree with that, Stuart?
Well, yeah, it does. But then in 1 Timothy chapter 4, it talks about searing your conscience.
Yeah.
And I think that can happen. I think people can know better. They can know better, but they just go against it until finally it's just, they don't even think about it anymore.
Yeah, that scriptural idea of burning it with a hot iron, searing it with a hot iron. When you go against your conscience over and over again, it becomes less and less. And that would also be true of the moral law. If you violate the moral law over and over again, let's say you defraud your neighbor over and over again, it becomes normalized. I think you can see examples of that of soldiers in a war where they're put into terrible circumstances and do things that they wouldn't have dreamed of doing when they were still living back home. So yeah, that's a serious problem of defiling the conscience, or searing the conscience.
So what do you think is the first step of questioning your conscience? Is it asking yourself, will this harm someone? We always say do no harm for the moral law.
I think that's a great way to start. Does this harm anyone? Does this behavior, no, let me put it this way. The prohibition of this behavior, does it stand on solid ground? Does it stand on moral principles? Or is it laws, doctrines made up by men? And we have to have the courage to examine that. And if it doesn't stand up to that scrutiny, to dismiss it into the trash can. And that takes some courage, doesn't it?
Right, because it also there's some psychology involved here. The brain is designed to make you feel safe, and safe is comfortable. So when you start to do things that are outside of your comfort zone, you typically don't feel safe. And so you can say, well, that's wrong because I don't feel safe. What percentage of humanity, Scott, would you say are reactive? In the science of human behavior, people do what they do because of how they feel, what they believe, what they value, and feedback. How many of them are mostly operating off of how they feel?
Probably about 95 to 99%. No, honestly. Seriously.
Yeah, I think so. So the conscience makes you feel bad, and you don't have the tools in your toolbox to examine, well, does it do harm?
Mm-hmm.
Is it really bad?
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't step out of that comfort zone. Who was it that said we prefer the agony, the certainty of agony over the agony of uncertainty?
I don't know who said that, but I like it.
I'll come up with the name here in a minute. I'm pulling back the files, But
Yeah, pawing through them. So to answer the question, I think there is a difference between the moral law. There's a huge difference between the moral law and the conscience.
Yes.
And if we're going to be big boys and girls, we need to stand up, put the big boy and girl pants on, and begin to examine our zip code law. That zip code law is
that's it.
As much as you love it, as much as you adore it and embrace it, you need to examine it, because there's nothing sacred about your zip code. There's nothing special and sacred about where you were born, the religion and family you were born into. There's nothing amazing about that and magical. Everybody in this world is born into a zip code, so to speak, and they need to examine that. And we can't have double standards, because are you the person that has a double standard and says, no, my zip code law, the religion of my birth, for example, my habits and culture and religion are sacred, they're absolutely true, and I don't have to examine everything. I can just lean back in my lazy boy, enjoy lemonade, and live my zip code law. But everybody else in the world has to go through the arduous labor, mental labor of examining their zip code law, and probably have to let go of a lot of it and adopt new principles and values. And that's really hard. And that's a double standard that we think we don't have to and everybody else has to. That's crazy. That's really unjust.
That also goes into that verse, though, about having your conscience seared, because you take a dogmatic religious leader, he has his ideas, maybe they're quite narrow, about what's right and wrong. And then if one of his people steps out of that, he says, see, you've seared your conscience. But he himself is stepping out in some other area.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
So I think we have to examine our conscience. We need a way to critique it. So, Stuart, what do we critique it with? What tools do we have available to critique our conscience with, and to determine which laws that we have on our conscience are just not defensible, not tenable, and which ones are legitimate and need to stay?
Well, one of the things this guy mentioned to me when he called me is he said, I said that every event that comes into our life comes into the bottom half of our brain, which is the emotional side of our brain. We have an emotional reaction. Then, if we're emotionally intelligent, it goes to the upper story of the brain, which is logic and reasoning. And we say, okay, I felt bad because I did this, but is it really bad? Did it hurt anyone? Did it cause a problem? Does it go against the moral law inside of my heart? And so when you're really honest, you're no longer operating out of feelings. You're starting to operate out of beliefs and values. And then, of course, feedback. You know, I come over here to Africa and people give me feedback and they say, well, you can't do that. And I say, well, why not? Well, it's not our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or I say, well, why are you doing that? And they say, it's just how we do things. And see, that's feedback. So all those things are what I call influencers in our behavior. And I think if 90 or 95% of humanity is just operating out of their feelings, they're stuck. They're stuck. They need to develop their logic and reasoning and critical thinking skills.
My view is that many people, tens of thousands, if not millions, labor under a heavy load of trying to comply with man's laws. And it has very little to do with the moral law. And I'll step into your domain here, into your wheelhouse, and quote from the Bible. And Paul says, I'm convinced that all things are lawful, but not all things are expedient. Think about that. Think how much latitude that gives a person.
Mm-hmm.
Almost all, did he say all things are almost? I think he said all things are lawful, but not all things are expedient. So that's something that you would basically never hear a pastor say. They can't say
right.
it because they have too many man-made laws. So I don't know. I think there's a whole lot more freedom available to us than what we are willing to enjoy, except for doing harm. We simply must not commit theft, and any violation of the moral law is a form of theft.
I don't know if you want to go down this rabbit trail, but in Africa, there's a lot of polygamy. And so their conscience or their zip code law accepts it. But there's some parts of the world that would not accept polygamy.
Like here in the U.S.
But I think like I say, I don't know if we want to discuss this now or later, but in some parts of the world, in some circumstances, I mean, supposing a country was devastated by war and 80% of the men were killed, I think there's a verse in Isaiah that said 7 women will cling to one man They said, just give us your name for protection. We'll buy our own food, we'll buy our own clothes, but we need the security so that other men uh, won't take advantage of them.
This is the difference between the moral law and religious law. Let's do a thought experiment. Okay, we have a cataclysmic event in the world. It's wiped everybody off the world except for one man and 10 women, for example. They're young, nubile, fertile women of childbearing age, and the man is also. So one man and 10 women, they're on an island somewhere. They don't have to be on an island. They're just on a desolate part of the earth. Everybody else has been wiped off the earth. So religious law says that man could only take one wife. That's what religious law says generally, leaving 9 women without children and the possibility that the human race would die out. That's religious law. The moral law would say, do no harm. So the way you would do harm is in this case, for that man to actually have more than one wife, to practice plural marriage or polygamy. That's the least amount of harm. Which should you follow, the least amount of harm or a religious law? This might be troubling to religious people.
Oh, it will be, but we're trying to teach people how to think, not what to think.
Yeah. So I would vote for doing the least amount of harm. Just continue the thought experiment. If the one man takes one wife, there's a chance that that woman is not able to have children, for one thing, or maybe not have children that survive, and the human race dies out. And then there's potential for a lot of jealousy with the other 9 women that don't have a partner and can't have children. In that particular case, it's far, far better, in my view, for the man to have more than one wife. But that goes against religious law. Now, to bring it back home, though, in the modern era with the world is fully populated, plenty of people everywhere, too many in a lot of cases, at least especially if you love open spaces and like to get away from people for a time. And also in the interest of developing the deepest possible relationship for one another, between the man and the woman, in 99.9% of the times, in my view, it's best for a man to just have one wife.
That's right. And the other thing, let's examine this using some other principles. Let's say responsibility and authority. So in my view, if a man takes authority over a lady, he has a corresponding responsibility to provide for her monetarily and securely for her and the offspring. So realistically, how many men are capable of providing for sufficiently more than one wife?
It's an issue, and especially when we go back to a metric that I've used for myself, is that when we measure that authority is being used properly, is that the people around you are thriving. And so there's only so much a person can take care of.
Well, there's a guy that I'm aware of here, and he doesn't call them necessarily his wives, but he said he has 7 women, or has had. I think some of them have passed away, and I think around 42 children. But I'm fairly certain that he doesn't put them all. He doesn't pay all their school fees. I'm not even sure if he knows all their names.
He doesn't send all 42 through Harvard.
No.
And is it with? Here's another factor: is it with the consent of all those partners? Is it with the consent of the women? It has to be with their consent.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he's just ramrodding the thing through because he wants it. So.
Because he's selfish, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, living by the moral law of doing no harm is a completely different way of a completely different guidance system than religious law. Religious law quickly meets a brick wall where it simply doesn't know how to answer difficult questions. Here's the deal. Humans are flesh and blood. They're soft. They bleed. They break. They tear. The law is a hard object. So when you have a hard religious law applied to the flesh of humans, and I'm speaking quite metaphorically here, it hurts people. It tears people apart when you apply that hard-edged law, religious law, to people, because people have such varied circumstances and situations, and there needs to be some compassion and understanding and flexibility. And the moral law easily does that. It organically, intrinsically does that, where religious law does not have any idea how to adapt, except the so-called priesthood retires back to the back room and has a little conversation among themselves, and then they come out and announce an exception of the rule for this particular person. So what kind of a deal is that?
Well, once again, you're under the authority of a human instead of under the authority of your creator.
Exactly, and I don't agree with that.
No, I don't agree with that. I think we've talked about it several times, Scott, that this is not a religious podcast, and we are open to questions. We love questions.
Yeah, challenges.
Yeah,
I like challenges.
and
Yeah.
a lot of religious leaders do not like questions.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend here that has an inquisitive mind, and normally it gets him in trouble with religious leaders because they start asking questions and they're pretty soon sidelined.
Yeah.
Why don't you go off? Yeah,
The institution quickly takes on a life of its own,
it does.
and it becomes an organism. It doesn't have a soul, but it has a desire for life, a desire to survive. That's just incredible. And the institution will do anything it can to survive and continue.
Well, and we are predisposed to want connection and acceptance. So that institution takes advantage of that. And they say, if you're going to be accepted and connected in our club, you're going to do certain things, and you're not going to do certain things. So they become the law that's outside of us becomes stronger or more influential to us than the law that's inside of us.
Yeah, this is what should happen. This is the process. We're raised in a zip code law. So we've got, let's say, the zip code law is up here. The moral law is fairly quiet because the zip code law is speaking so loudly. It's actually at the level of idolatry. And our process, if we're a truth seeker and we're really pursuing truth and we're courageous, willing to challenge all kind of things that we've held dear and sacred, is to reverse that and actually bring the moral law to the top and make it more salient, louder than the zip code law, how we were raised.
Well, Scott, I kind of think we've answered the question. If we haven't, they can put more questions in the question, or they can private message one of us. Some people are nervous about putting their name out and saying, I have this question, and that's entirely understandable. We've kind of overcome that. But for those who are still in the process, well, we're still in the process too, they can just private message one of us and say, hey, I still have a question. Would you address this?
Getting used to the sensation of disapproval is not a bad thing. It's something we need to become comfortable with.
Well, I think it's a sign of maturity.
Okay, well, thank you, Stuart.
Yeah, to be able to question things. It's a sign of maturity to be able to question things that are not considered questionable. And it's also, I think you've got a statement on this, Scott, where you don't have to make a ready decision on everything that comes into your mind.
Perfect. Hold it in your hand loosely. Just let it sit there in your hand and wait for more information to come in. And just be okay with the uncertainty, be okay with the mystery. You don't have to know today.
That's the challenge.
Because if you demand an answer today, you'll probably just choose the wrong answer.
That's right. Okay, hey, good discussion.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
See you.